Buonasera, benvenuti a MAXXI ancora. Stasera c'è una discussione con l'artista americana Amie Siegel, arrivata oggi. Oggi sì, just arrived. E poi c'è Mariolina Bassetti, Italia, e anche c'è Pippo Ciorra, senior curator del MAXXI, per MAXXI Architettura. Sono Hou Hanru, direttore artistico e curatore di questo progetto con Monia. Allora, oggi parliamo in inglese perché prima io non parlo bene italiano e poi Amie io penso sia ancora un po' più difficile. Dunque c'è la tradizione con headset, come si dice in italiano? Sì. Okay. Thank you very much for coming, and today we have this opportunity to welcome Amie Siegel and Mariolina, one as our guest artist and our guest speaker, to discuss on, number one, the particular project of Amie Siegel, and probably a larger question about what Utopia means to us today in terms of social, economic, and of course, artistic activities. So this project has been conceived in a certain kind of emergency situation. And with Monia, we have been working for about 3 weeks or 4 weeks time, really to imagine and conceptualize this project. And of course, we mobilized the whole team of the MAXXI curators to help us to develop this project from perhaps the beginning of this year, and then we opened the exhibition like a few weeks later. Why this emergency? I think there is maybe a very, very urgent need for us to understand the relationship between what is possible and what we desire to do in terms of an art institution. What kind of thematic topics that we try to deal with as a way to negotiate with the current crisis. And this crisis, it's of course, financial, economic, and also political. This is very much evident in a country like Italy today. And of course, the legendary, almost like a mysterious kind of rumors about the MAXXI. MAXXI is always in crisis. Yeah, every now and then we talk about, MAXXI is having troubles and so on. And we try to really understand in such kind of situation, what a public art institution can still provide us a platform for not only creative voices to be heard, and also some hope for us to, through artistic imagination and actions, we can think about that art can bring us a certain possibility to change the current situation. And this is perhaps the major mission of an institution like the MAXXI. So we decided to question this very banal, very common, but in the meantime, eternal question of utopia, meaning that our desire, our hope, and how much this has been has been eroded over time, and how much we can still how much we can still introduce the imagination of the artist to negotiate with such an erosion. So, of course, the question of utopia is very much related to a long history of social production and economic production. So the history of architecture, the history of urbanism, the history of modernity itself has been generally motivated by this desire for creating a better world, which is the so-called utopia. And of course, the reason why artists are working as an artist is also motivated by such a desire. So over time, we find out also the reality in which we live has been going for some time against such an idealist vision of the world. The reality, especially since the time that when so-called neoliberalism has become a kind of dominant force to generate a lot of problematics in our everyday life, that the question of utopia has to be re-examined. And we also find out many artists has been engaging with a kind of critical reviews, the critical examination of this relationship, this impact of the erosion of the utopian world and the crisis of the everyday. And of course, it also has happened that one of the major artists who has been working very powerfully in terms of criticizing such a reality, Alan Sekula, happened to unfortunately pass away last year. And as a homage to such a wonderful artist who has been really influential to the whole generation of creators, we decided to consecrate this exhibition as a homage to Alan Sekula. And again, this exhibition tries to cover not only the situation in Italy, in the West, in America, but also along with the expansion of globalization of transnational capitalism, this tension between the utopian imagination and the crisis in reality has become a global situation. So this is why we also expanded our horizon towards China, towards other parts of the world, and try to really bring artists from different parts of the world to face a common challenge. So yeah. So let's today we have Amie who came to visit us, especially to introduce her film, and I have to say the title of this exhibition is to a great extent has been inspired by Amie's work. Her work is really dealing with a very interesting examination of a history of a utopian architecture project, how this become objects for sale today, how this becomes a commodity, the idealism of a new society becomes a commodity. And to provide a more specific explanation on the background, we invited our senior curator of architecture, Pippo Ciorra, to provide us a kind of background on the history of Chandigarh project designed by Le Corbusier. And next to us we have also Mariolina Bassetti, sorry. Bassetti, sorry.
Perfect.
Bassetti. Yeah. But Italian names sometimes I only know the names of football players. Sorry. She's been chairing the Christie's, Italia, which is one of the major auction house that has, I guess, a lot of influence on the art markets in and out of Italy, I guess. And it happens that the Amie's work directly dealt with also the system of auction itself. So we invited Mariolina to come to join us for the discussion. So Pippo.
They were telling me about the phone. I think I will be more popular if I speak Italian, is that right? Sì, sì. Yeah. Grazie, buonasera. Insieme ad Hanru ringrazio Mariolina Bassetti e Amie Siegel per essere qui. Le Corbusier aveva intitolato un capitolo verso un'architettura intitolato Architettura o rivoluzione, che è già un messaggio per far capire che molto spesso l'utopia degli artisti o degli architetti non è esattamente la traduzione letterale dell'utopia che abbiamo in mente da un punto di vista politico, spesso anche è la soluzione utopica di problemi, di conflitti politici, no? L'arte o l'architettura. Chandigarh è la rappresentazione perfetta di quest'idea dell'utopia dell'artista, dell'utopia dell'architetto. Il Novecento ha disegnato e immaginato città perfettamente moderne per tutto il secolo, ma ne ha costruite molto poche, no? La città moderna molto spesso si è concretizzata nelle periferie della città ottocentesca, pensate alla Germania, alle Siedlung, e poi la Francia, l'Italia, tutte le città che hanno costruito intorno alle vecchie città. Ci sono alcuni casi, alcuni gioielli nella storia del Novecento attorno ai quali costruiamo il nostro sapere intorno alla città moderna, che sono Brasilia, Chandigarh, alcuni altri frammenti sparsi noi abbiamo Sabaudia per esempio, no? Eccetera, e quindi è un distillato perfetto di questo. L'India è indipendente dal 1947, nel 1949 si decide di mettere la capitale, insomma si fa tutto il ragionamento sugli stati, sulla divisione religioni e stati, ma questo chi ha letto Rushdie, no? Lo sa meglio di me. E alla fine nel 1949 si decide di bloccare quei terreni nel Punjab, dove poi sarà messa Chandigarh. Nel 1950 si incaricano due architetti che si chiamano Königsberg e Mayer. Il progetto di Le Corbusier è velocissimo, già nel 1951 presenta il progetto per la città, che è basata su questi grandi isolati, su questa specie di acropoli intorno ai quali sono costruiti i monumenti più importanti, il segretariato, il Parlamento, la famosa mano, eccetera. Insomma, e la città già nel 1952 comincia la progettazione degli edifici singoli, e in sostanza Le Corbusier muore nel 67, se adesso non sono troppo stanco, un anno dopo Nehru, e la città è già per buona parte costruita, ma ha quell'impatto che hanno le utopie all'inizio, no? È incompleta, è fredda, è morta, è bella, è troppo astratta, è troppo irrisolta, e quindi Le Corbusier non vede mai, e comincia un grande dibattito, no? Storiografico, di critica di architettura, sulla possibilità di costruire una città da zero, da una persona di cultura occidentale in India, eccetera. In realtà Chandigarh continua a crescere, come un po' è successo anche con Brasilia, per esempio. Diventa piano piano una grande città di 800.000 abitanti, in cui il cuore fa il cuore, non fa più tutto il corpo della città, e tutto sommato direi che non si può più definire un esperimento non riuscito. Diciamo che è un grande progetto con aspetti che ci convincono e altri aspetti che ci convincono meno. Cos'è interessante di Chandigarh dal punto di vista della ricerca di Amie? Uno, che Chandigarh succede in un momento in cui Le Corbusier è molto preso da un concetto che abbiamo investigato anche quando abbiamo fatto la mostra sulle Corbusier qui l'anno scorso, che è il tema della sinestesia, cioè dell'idea che ogni progetto, ogni atto, ogni gesto avvolge, involves, come dire, include, coinvolge tutte le arti, no? Per cui il progetto di Le Corbusier per Chandigarh va da una scultura, che è quella grande mano che non dimentichiamo mai, fino ai mobili, fino alle sedie, alle sedie che sono fatte, interessante, mescolando il disegno moderno con degli elementi locali, no? Sono fatte di legno di teak, di palissandro, sono fatte di cuoio di animali già morti, ovviamente, perché siamo in India e non si potevano certo uccidere bovini per fare leather. E però è bello proprio questo, no? Cioè l'idea che il pensiero di un architetto, forse di un architetto di un'epoca diversa da questa, andasse davvero non solo dal cucchiaio alla città, ma dal cucchiaio alla città per tornare fino all'arte, per arrivare fino al disegno dei mobili. Questa potenza, no, dell'autorialità di Le Corbusier, che si dissemina dal disegno della città anche agli edifici, nelle foto, nei libri troviamo spesso attribuiti a lui anche edifici che non ha disegnato lui, no? Che sono fatti dal cugino, da Chenré o da Maxwell Fry, e si allunga fino a sedersi sulle sedie e sui mobili che poi cominceranno a diventare oggetti di culto, di grande valore, design super vintage, come diremmo oggi, e vanno a occupare il lavoro di Amie. Quindi direi la storia di Chandigarh è questa, è un po' il riassunto della storia dell'utopia del Novecento. A Londra l'altro giorno avevo fatto uno schizzo per cui il moderno era una parabola invece che la solita iperbole verso l'infinito, e penso che la storia, anche proprio il modo in cui ritornano i mobili all'indietro nella storia di Amie Siegel, nel video di Amie Siegel, ci racconta esattamente questa complessità difficile, labirintica, spesso che torna e ripassa su se stessa, che ha l'utopia nella storia della cultura europea e mondiale del Novecento. Basta, grazie.
Grazie Pippo. So now, Amie, how do you become interested in Chandigarh, or in this very particular element of the whole project, which is the furniture?
Right. Is this on? Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for bringing me here, and it's such a pleasure to be part of this extremely thoughtful exhibition. So I began this project, which has multiple elements, as many of my works have multiple parts that create a kind of ensemble that constitute one work, but at the same time are also sometimes shown separately. But this project is an ensemble, but it's an ensemble that unfolded also over time. And now it is complete, or so I think. One never really knows. But for me, it's pretty much complete. And I had made a film about I had made several pieces about former East Germany, about the GDR. And in one of them called DDR, DDR, or DDR, DDR, which is like a Rorschach title, there was an East German chair, like a chair that was made for the masses, a kind of East German version of the Pantone chair, which is a very popular design chair. And East Germany had, not to get too far into this, but they had invested, speaking of Utopia, in molded, injected plastic to create modern furniture for the masses. And it was a common garden chair. And in my piece, it sort of it follows a trajectory where it starts in a kind of old apartment block, like a 60s apartment block apartment, and it goes from there to a flea market, and then it gets bought and it goes in a chic little boutique store in East Berlin in the present. This is all unfolding in the present. And then it gets bought again, and then it goes on a ship, on a cargo ship, and then it ends up in New York, in Tribeca, among the many furniture stores marked up for a considerable amount of money in the window of the store. And I was looking up, this is all to say that I've been involved with chairs for a while. We have a long relationship. But also that I I was looking up what happened with that chair, because I kind of came up with that out of my own imagination, of living in Berlin and seeing the kind of commodification or fetishization of certain design objects from one economy and culture, meaning socialist economy and culture of the GDR, being kind of re-commodified and fetishized in the capitalist new West, essentially the takeover of East Germany by the West, or the sort of capitalization of unified Germany. And I found this piece, I was sort of clicking around online, and I found it in an auction catalog after I'd made my project, and I was really astonished that something that I had come up with out of my own imagination actually came to pass, that this object entered the marketplace. And then I clicked, and that online page turning software, it just kind of went over, and there was a whole spread of Chandigarh furniture by Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, and I recognized it, and I thought, what is that doing there? What is that doing in an auction catalog? And I had known about the furniture only in a very vague way, in that friends I knew had gone to Chandigarh and had photographed. They had somehow managed to photograph on in some of the buildings, and they showed me their pictures as, here's what Chandigarh looks like. And I kept saying, but what's that furniture up on the terrace, or what's that about? And then I remembered these two things and put them together and realized that probably this was the same furniture I saw that had been sort of looked like it was discarded. And then I started researching, and within 25 minutes, I knew that this was this kind of massive trafficking, as I think of it, in furniture that was happening in auction houses all over the world, all the major auction houses, Phillips, Art Curial, Christie's, etc. And it was, to me, completely fascinating that this was happening. So I went about planning this massive project and traveling all over to shoot it. And I knew also very early on, like within a week or so of having the initial idea of doing this project, which follows the furniture from its current location in collectors' homes backward to the auctions, backward to the restoration of the furniture in Europe, backward to the cargo ships, and then back finally to Chandigarh, that I would also auction the first in the edition of the work that I would make, that my work would be editioned, as it often is, and that it would also become a commodity, and it would also enter the marketplace, and this kind of closeness or proximity of the market to, artist's market, let's say, to the market for design and furniture was very interesting to me. And in my own work, I'm often engaging in a kind of reflexivity, a kind of gesture of reflexivity that implicates the work itself or my own activities. I think I've said a lot.
Io parlerò in italiano, se per te va bene. Allora, onestamente io sono stata invitata qui, grazie per avermi invitato, buonasera a tutti. Non ero esattamente cosciente di cosa avrei dovuto dire, quindi sono arrivata qui, ho guardato la mostra, ho parlato con Amie e sono una tabula rasa, nel senso che ho raccolto tutti gli input e sono realmente affascinata da questo lavoro fantastico che Amie ha fatto, l'ho trovato geniale, devo dire, e estremamente contemporaneo, perché stavo riflettendo mentre sentivo sia Pippo che Amie parlare, rispecchia veramente i nostri tempi, è un fenomeno che è esattamente di questi giorni, di questo periodo, fa parte dell'arte a tutti gli effetti. Cioè oggi è cambiato completamente il concetto dell'arte e il mercato è parte integrante dell'arte, lo è sempre stato, perché nell'Ottocento sappiamo i saloni letterari, sappiamo che le gallerie erano luogo di scambio e il mercato era considerato importante, ma veniva sempre dopo la morte dell'artista, cioè non non esistevano artisti ricchi. Oggi il mercato è un po' un risvolto dell'artista, arrivano ad essere ricchi quando sono già giovanissimi, e sicuramente il fenomeno dell'asta ha contribuito nel bene o nel male a renderlo possibile. Per cui le aste di contemporaneo sono diventate aste più profittevoli delle aste di antico e anche di impressionismo, che prima erano le aste più importanti. È un fenomeno degli ultimi anni, mentre prima le aste di arte impressionista e moderna erano le aste più importanti dell'anno e realizzavano un certo totale. Oggi le aste di post-war e contemporary raggiungono delle cifre ben più alte di quelle di impressionist. Per guardare ad esempio l'ultime aste di New York, in una sola sera il post-war contemporary ha raggiunto 671 milioni di dollari. How old are you? Can I ask you? Ok, 25. Quindi comunque è molto raro, cioè, pensate a Van Gogh, cioè Van Gogh all'età di Amie certo non avrebbe potuto essere così costoso. Questo un po' rappresenta lo stato del mercato e in questo momento, e quanto l'asta venga e il mercato faccia parte della storia dell'arte. Amie è partita dalla fine, è partita da un'asta, quindi in qualche modo facendo diventare l'asta parte dell'opera d'arte, e questo è diciamo è il simbolo di quello che sta succedendo. Un'opera d'arte senza valore, senza prezzo, senza dargli un valore, perde la sua qualità. Da una parte è molto triste perché togliamo all'opera d'arte la parte più poetica, dall'altra però credo che sia il risvolto dei tempi. Un altro fattore determinante in questo momento, che vi può far capire quanto sia importante il numero nella storia dell'arte, è che sta nascendo un nuovo mercato totalmente nuovo che si chiama il mercato dei capolavori, per cui nelle aste importanti, soprattutto a New York, quelle 30 opere più importanti nella produzione dell'artista diventano un simbolo per dei nuovi popoli, paesi emergenti molto più ricchi rispetto all'Europa occidentale, per cui possedere una delle opere più importanti di quell'artista, parliamo di artisti iperstoricizzati come Basquiat, Warhol, anche con yes. A dicembre, il 18 dicembre esattamente, abbiamo avuto la nostra prima asta a Bombay in India, che è stato un successo enorme, ma anche quindi un paese come l'India anche ormai è diventato parte di quel percorso commerciale che la Christie's, che sicuramente, almeno così si dice, è la casa d'aste più importante nel mondo, sta percorrendo, e ci stiamo spostando. Prima la sede principale era Londra, poi è diventata New York, poi Hong Kong, Shanghai. Adesso tutte le nostre energie sono sulla Cina e sull'India, questo vi fa capire. E per ritornare al discorso che facevo prima, quelle 30 opere ormai raggiungono dei prezzi, che so, Basquiat 48 milioni di dollari, perché russi, cinesi, indiani, arabi vogliono il meglio di quell'artista, e non ha niente a che vedere con la stima media di quell'artista, è soltanto avere il meglio. Ed è un po', per tornare ai mobili indiani, stile Corbusier quello che è successo a questi mobili. Non nascono come mobili popolari di una città sicuramente non per ricchi, e non hanno nessun tipo di successo, cioè credo che non siano mai stati venduti nei prodotti. Originariamente nessuno ha potuto godere di questi mobili. Riescono a essere vivi, avere a vivere il motivo per cui erano stati costruiti solamente nel momento che entrano nei casi dei ricchi, entrano nelle case d'asta e hanno un loro valore. Soprattutto sono simbolo del capitalismo, sono simbolo dell'essere ricchi, dell'essere agiati, di essere più importanti degli altri. Allora in quel momento sono realizzati, vengono veicolati e raggiungono prezzi importanti nelle aste più importanti. Amie è riuscita a cogliere la storia e anche il paradosso di questi giorni, dove per diventare preziosi bisogna entrare nelle case del simbolo della ricchezza.
Però scusa Mariolina, I have a question. Il key point, no? Il nodo è proprio di Amie è questo, perché un conto è l'opera di Basquiat, che è comunque un'opera fatta per essere venduta. Qual è il processo, visto dal tuo punto di vista, che fa di un oggetto d'uso un'opera d'arte estremamente costosa? Qual è il momento in cui scatta? È la cultura che lo fa diventare così, perché quando l'esperto lo trova in un mercatino, anche Amie può rispondere, quando l'esperto lo trova in un mercatino indiano lo rimette in circolo, no? Non è il mercato che lo scopre, ma è la cultura che lo scopre all'inizio.
Can you repeat it in English?
Yeah,
I think also for other people.
I'd like to hear both of you on this, because where's the point? Where is the moment when this everyday piece of furniture designed by Corbu becomes a piece of art? This is not the market who does this, but it's a culture act, no? Of somebody who knows Corbu, who knows the story, goes to a little market in Calcutta and find one of these chairs, or it is the market who's looking desperately for something from the post-war modernism to make it, to put some aura around it and make it extremely expensive as it is?
Well, I mean, mid-century design was not particularly sought after until the last, 20 years, and certainly in the last 10 years it's become ubiquitous, this kind of period. But the people who created the market for the Le Corbusier Chandigarh furniture are the same people who, when Art Nouveau and Wiener Werkstätte and this like secession was exhausted, then they went for Prouvé and they found Jean Royer, like this sort of transition from Jean Royer to Jean Prouvé, and then they've exhausted the Prouvé in Europe, and then they found all the projects elsewhere, and they went to Africa and Brazil and all the sort of places where that paradox of post-colonial countries where the first gesture in the independent moment is oddly to look towards European architects to set a precedent of modernist kind of utopian architecture, and along with that came all that furniture, and then you have these very clever European dealers who go back and they find those projects, and then they take everything, or they take quite a bit of it, and then they bring it to the auction houses or to their galleries in Europe and sort of sell it back to the European audience that would see value in it. So it's this kind of strange, but it also has a relationship to the colonial. It's this kind of interesting reverse colonial cycle, where it's...
So nobody in New York has one of this chair because he has bought it for $50 in a market in India.
No, well, also you can't anymore. But the furniture still leaves the country. I mean, no, it's in the sense that it was the dealers who pulled it out for the most part. That's exactly it. And Christie's, of course, is like, I think of Christie's as like the auction house, like the first auction house. And if you study history of auctions, it's always coming up the image, that caricature of the sale room in London. This kind of very interesting drawing, but at the same time, when I thought about this project, I chose to do I pursued, let's say, auctioning my piece at Christie's in London as opposed to Christie's in New York or anywhere else, where they have the auctions, because of the UK's colonial relationship to India. And that the furniture is there, and that my film starts in London and then it somehow cycles back with when I film the auction of my film, which is lot 248, which is the video on the screen when you first come in the exhibition.
Io credo che il momento in cui scatta oggi è quel momento in cui il marketing, la pubblicità, la promozione decide di renderlo un oggetto prezioso. Cioè, mi piacerebbe rispondere alla cultura, che tutti conoscono la storia, e questo lo rende più prezioso. Purtroppo temo che non sia così, è proprio una questione di marketing e proprio di desiderio e di chi lo vuole. Questo lo rende un oggetto prezioso.
I think there's some two interesting things here, two points here. One is Amie's work. It's actually it's highly poetic, and this is an incredibly beautifully made, very how to say, explored really the maximum possible the language of film. Maybe even the technology of digital film today, which is this kind of search for perfection somehow brings us to a kind of reading of a very cruel reality in kind of poetic way, very much emphasized, and that generates an interesting distance, a kind of aesthetic distance that brings us to some kind of nostalgia on the other hand, and there's also a kind of irony in it. And when you really think about that, it's all these very cool images that somehow reframe the language of modernism. Here, the piece is so ironic. I don't know if this is something that you search for, or it happens like that. I guess a series of your work that I knew from the Black Moon to Winter to the Day and so on. They're all somehow related to this interesting creation of an aesthetic tension between a modernist perfection and the criticality of the modernity, the modernist form itself. The second point I was actually thinking is, in the auction market today, what happens? It's reflecting to the change of notion of time. That the auction market is no longer about history. It's about history, but the history is being rewritten into a kind of simultaneous, somehow generate a multiple possibility of framing time, and that maybe it's a really interesting kind of shaking of how we evaluate value of things in the past. This is two questions I maybe want to bring.
How would you say the second question then?
Well, it's not really a question. Maybe it's really about how the notion of value is no longer attached to a kind of linear concept of accumulation of things, but or the reality of things. It's
Yeah. I mean, it is, it purports to be backwards, but in fact it's simultaneous. You know, if you really, really look at it, it's simultaneous, and you would understand this. But, I mean, I think what's also interesting is this, that there's a kind of fiction of scarcity about the furniture, and also in my film, that it's purposefully, my piece is purposefully a limited edition, and it's a small edition. You know, it's not an edition of 8 or 10, which somehow seems much larger or greedier. And also within, I'm really glad that you brought up this sort of conditions of film and of cinema and the moving image, because, you know, the piece was sort of purports a certain truthfulness about it, but in fact it has moments of extreme inauthenticity built into it. So just like the furniture, probably many of those pieces are, you know, you have a desk, and the desk is reassembled from 7 desks that are in terrible shape, but somehow from parts of all 7, you can reassemble 1. And, you know, or there's what's authentic. Someone once said to me, I think what's authentic about that chair is 1 screw. And, you know, this is, of course, a wide range of different dealers and different restoration practices, et cetera. And restoration in France of mid-century furniture is like the newest thing that, you know, when you study restoration in Paris, you're studying how to restore, like Louis XV chairs. You're not studying how to restore Prouvé or Corbe or Generet chairs. But in my piece, you know, for example, the cargo ship scene, you know, if you think about it, how would we possibly have been inside a shipping container in the middle of the ocean, you know, on a cargo ship? I mean, Sukula manages to get pretty close, I think, in many of his works, but to be actually inside one is, you know, it's obviously in some level of fiction when it's considered, and also the shot that precedes it of the cargo ship is a shot that I've licensed. You know, it's a stock image. And it's so it's an image of transit that transits between God knows what. It's probably in commercials. It's probably in a lot of things. It's also in several of my pieces. I've reused it several times. So this image of the cargo ship transits through my work as well. So there are certain elements of fiction or inauthenticity that parallel, that are built in. And then there's also the issue of, which really interested me, of the image, this high definition image, this crystalline image that we worked on, because I shoot a whole range of formats, and I'm sort of like a format slut. Like, I really love different formats, and I'm easy with formats. But I'm interested in how the format, film or video or HD or Super 8, reflects a certain iconography that's associated with it, at least for certain generations. And this high definition image, this is like the only time I've ever wanted to turn my own piece down, the volume down on my own work. But this high definition image, which is in a way modeled after the Shelter magazine, you know, the glossy pages of Architectural Digest or World of Interiors, at least for the scenes in the work that have the collectors' homes in it, is very much set up as a kind of reflection of that we are creating also, that the film is itself suspect to the kind of perpetuation of images to sell objects, to create value, to, you know, create a culture of value or a fiction of value or a sense of scarcity. That the medium itself is somehow enacting this in the piece.
I think the symbol for the dictatorship of art, contemporary art today, is that we have not the power to lower the volume of the pieces we have here. I want to redo a question we were discussing before with Amie, which is, how did she get to the owners? Ho chiesto prima a lei come ha fatto a trovarli questi pezzi, come ha trovato I proprietari.
Well, it was very hard. But I mean, as Hanru knows, in my work, I sort of oddly, much of what I spend my time doing is getting permission for things, and it's a large percentage of my time. Yeah, and permission to film, permission to make something, whatever it is, and so I'm tremendously persistent. And I actually went through many shelter magazines, the magazines that we sort of enacted in the framing device of the piece. And I went through them online, and I went through them, physical ones, and then I just asked people. But basically I started to realize, and I read really silly books about design collecting that I was embarrassed to have in my studio and would hide under other books that were more interesting when people would come for a visit. But what I learned from those things actually was really valuable, because I learned that there was these sorts of waves of taste. Like there's an inner circle, and the inner circle is actually quite small, and they get interested in something, or they're very close to the dealers who sell these things, or sell many things in fact, and then they have them in their homes or in their galleries or in their spaces, and then they're seen by their clients, which is like the next wave, the collectors, and then the very influential, very wealthy foundation collectors and private collectors of public collections, and then it goes on from there, and then there's an outer circle, and then an outer circle, and it's like kind of a transmission process. And so what I had to do was basically follow, just like my piece, the transmission process backward, inside. So from the outermost ring, because I would certainly be somewhere between the outermost ring and some inner point, and find people to connect me to people further and further and further inside until I was in the point where I was, on the phone with somebody's personal assistant, and they were going to let me onto their yacht if I signed 1 million non-disclosure forms, and I didn't even know who they were. You might actually be interested to know that a major source of inspiration for me when I was filming the piece, I was in London, and a friend, I was just finished filming, and I was near Hampstead Heath, and I said, I'm going to go walk in the Heath. I've never been there. And a friend said, you should go to Kenwood House, which is a stately home, that is now owned by the sort of government of the UK, and it was recently restored. And I went there, and I saw there this Hogarth print from 1742 called Taste in High Life, and in it is the family of, it's a sort of wealthy family living in their stately home, not the same home, but a stately home, and they're surrounded by their exotic objects that they bought at auction, and there's a monkey in the center of the family holding a scroll that's a sort of list of items that they bought at auction. And I was fascinated by this and coming upon this, and it felt like one of those auspicious gifts, to know that the owner of the house had enough, the sort of Lord, I can't pronounce his name, but anyway, he had the sort of self-reflexive sense of irony, maybe that you're talking about before, to buy this piece and to put it in his own home as a kind of comment on his own collecting practices. And I don't know if you've sort of thought about this or seen this with certain collectors, but it made a big impression on me, and also it made me think differently about objects and what happens when you have one chair alone, which is like an orphan, versus an ensemble of furniture in a room, which is like a menagerie, but not a public zoological menagerie, but like a private courtly menagerie, like in Schönbrunn, you would have. Like this sort of difference of objects, and it made me that really was what made me feel like the furniture were sort of surrogate people, and that the piece is essentially, on some level, also enacting a kind of uncanny diaspora, like an echo of almost human diaspora. Anyway.
Credo che gli oggetti a un certo punto diventino soggetto invece di essere dei luoghi che ci aiutano a vivere, diventano più importanti perché dimostrano chi siamo. Questo è sbagliato, trovo. Non diventano più una sedia dove sedersi, rappresentano il fatto che noi abbiamo degli oggetti più rari o che solo alcune persone si possono permettere. Mi stavo chiedendo mentre parlavate se questi oggetti che adesso sono stati in qualche modo recuperati alla storia e che non sono, chiedevo prima a Amie, ma c'è qualche casa industriale che riproduce queste...
It would be probably too expensive now for Cassina to buy the rights to rebuild these things, no? Since they became such...
Still listening.
No, I mean, you know that the Corbu furniture is copyrighted by this Italian company, which is named Cassina, who does... I mean, it would be maybe too expensive for Cassina to buy the rights to reproduce this today, no? Since they became such powerful pieces of art.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure who owns the sort of copyright on the design. I mean, that's a question for the Korb Foundation, who I've kind of shyly avoided, hoping that they're not going to come after me. Yeah, but it's interesting also because...
Depending on the case, but I don't know the situation could be. I don't know.
But there's so many pieces of this furniture, unlike the original, some of the original designs or the sort of prototypes, because these were made on site, and because, you know, they say something like there was at some time 10,000 pieces, and maybe a couple thousand were just destroyed, period. But I mean, that's not IKEA mass production, but it's really like a kind of a mass, you know, it's not scarce at the time. And then you can see in the furniture that there's all these strange variations because different people would produce them differently on site in Chandigarh. Yeah.
Allora, domande, c'è un'opportunità unica. Sì.
Per traduzione, sì. No, my question is very simple and is for Amie. What is for you Utopia?
What is Utopia?
Yeah, exactly.
Sleeping in, no. Well, you know, it's interesting because I don't have a personal, subjective relationship to those ideas. Just like I don't have that kind of connection to Le Corbusier, actually. In the sense that the piece isn't an homage to Le Corbusier in some way, because it's not a celebration, and so there's a kind of distance that Hanru spoke about before for me in connection to the architecture, and also in connection to modernism and to the sort of ideas that modernism purported to, you know, aspire toward. I'm still interested in those ideas, but I'm interested in them almost like not products, but as like products of thought and in a cultural history. And so thinking about what seemed to me so uncanny was that the furniture that's produced for the masses in a Western architect's vision of that, in fact, gets sold back to the West, and so it sort of misses its target in a way. It served its target, but it misses its target. And the scene in the film where you see everyone, you see this tracking shot of what probably looks like a call center. Like I've had people say that to me, but is in fact it's in the Secretariat building, which is like where you would go to get your passport renewed, or it's sort of city and state services on that level. And those are civil servants, you know, they're government workers, and they just want to sit comfortably in ergonomic chairs because their work is at computers for the most part now. And it's this kind of completely different value than Korb imagined, of course. But for me, it's not a comment on Korb's failure, you know. Though I can imagine people might bring that to the piece, but it's not for me. I don't have that kind of opinion about it. I'm just more interested in rendering the kinds of contradictions that I'm seeing. So it's a really good question about Utopia, and I've managed not to answer it.
But I think this critical distance you're able to establish is one of the most outstanding qualities of the work, and the irony that Hanru was quoting this. I think it works really well. It's very secular in relationship to the object, so it's all about
but it's a
the
different
device, no, that brings the object there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a different era. I mean, if you like, I was downstairs in the wonderful collection show looking at one of my favorite pieces, which is the Super Studio. You know, the sort of photo montage that they make, and also those crazy films that they make that I just love them. So like Life, Super Surface, they're so interesting, but it's like really it's a really different moment. You know, when things are it's this kind of like things are possible. You know, very Van Morrison, the song remains the same, kind of like world of pleasure and possibility. That also doesn't seem to know about the sort of world outside of Europe in a way yet. It's this kind of particular moment. So it's a different moment now, and I think thinking about that.
Studio as also very clear, a very specific social frame, I would say.
Yeah, and also very much in connection to World War II and the sort of the moment of World War II in relationship to, you know, what was at that time contemporary Italy, and the idea of architecture and the role that it played, which is different.
By the way, Super Studio, as a miracle, they're coming back as a group next Tuesday. Well, they're coming to the MAXXI. They are going to have a lecture Tuesday here. So after how many years? Divorce? 30 years of divorce. They come back and sit together again. So it will be quite spectacular. So you're welcome to come back.
Super Studio is what Amie was saying, and I totally agree, is this incredible presence of the future in that culture in the 60s. So everything was designed in the future, Utopia, or criticizing the design of the future, which was Super Studio basically. You know? So it's a critical view. But more questions?
Thank you. I was wondering how much you were influenced by contemporary photography, working in post-colonial places, like I'm thinking of South African contemporary photographers like Peter Rugo, or that generation of people working on post-colonial sites which have been reshaped or abandoned. So the first question would be more on the formal side of your film. And then the second question is to be whether you consider yourself to be part of the institutional critique movement.
Not part of any movement. Right, like I wouldn't want to be a part of any club that would have me as a member, sort of thing. Yeah, like the Marx, but the other Marx. But I don't know, I'm not familiar with the photography that you're referring to, at least the name that you mentioned. But, so I wouldn't say photography per se, but at the same time I was very interested, for example, in the more conceptual works of someone like Boetti, and when Boetti went elsewhere, like the sort of postcards that he made, the photographs of himself, not the found postcards, but the photographs of himself in Ecuador, where he sort of took a picture of himself with the sort of people who you would usually photograph, and so the presence of the artist in the piece was interesting to me. In an elsewhere, the sort of here and elsewhere simultaneously. I mean, Godard's work on the sense of here and elsewhere, like Ici was important to me at a certain point, or someone like Trinity Minha, who I don't know if she's so well known here, but as a filmmaker who's also a scholar, who's done so much work on kind of post-colonial thought, but also visual work on that. I come out of a certain trajectory of thinking about the movie and image really critically, and where one can go in that space after that.
And in rough architectural 20th century terms, you could say that there's something that has to do with displacement, no, in your video.
Yeah, absolutely. And also this question about time. I mean, what you said about the presence of the future sort of the anticipation of the future, building for the future in the present was really interesting to me. Yeah.
I have a question for Mariolina about auction and the expansion of auction. It's actually clearly kind of signify maybe a kind of a neo-colonial expansion of the markets. One model of our markets is now being expanded everywhere, and actually what is amazing is there are much less resistance to the auction in, for example, the Asian market than in Europe. Because in Europe there was a quite established regular gallery market, which is somehow more regulated, more respecting to the value, the common value of the art community. Right? And the auction market in so-called emerging countries are much more brutal in a way in terms of breaking down this established value system. I don't know if you have any comments on this situation.
Credo che io continuo a parlare in italiano. Credo che faccia parte proprio di quel discorso che facevamo prima, è una questione culturale. Cioè prima l'asta era molto meno comune anche in Europa, sicuramente. Se io guardo i cataloghi passati sono ricchissimi di opere di altissima qualità, ma sono molto poveri, sono l'immagine dell'opera, una descrizione semplicissima e basta. Chi andava all'asta erano qualche mercante, molti mercanti, antiquari a seconda del tipo di asta e pochissimi privati, quasi nessuno. Oggi l'asta è alla portata di tutti in Europa, parliamo prima dell'Europa. In Europa, America ormai è completamente immersa nel meccanismo dell'asta, conoscono benissimo i risultati, i media sono pieni di informazioni, ci sono dei siti dove si possono vedere i prezzi che hanno raggiunto determinati artisti, ormai tutti conoscono tutto e possono conoscere tramite internet qualsiasi cosa. Tutto questo è passato nei paesi emergenti dove tutto è più rapido, per cui hanno imparato immediatamente ad adeguarsi ai meccanismi dell'asta. In pochissimi anni, se parliamo degli artisti cinesi che erano poverissimi, hanno raggiunto nel giro neanche di anni, di mesi, prezzi altissimi, sono entrati nel mercato delle aste, prima delle gallerie, poi delle aste. Credo che questo gli abbia fatto anche male, abbiano perso a volte l'ispirazione, a volte la sofferenza di cui ha bisogno anche un artista, credo, per produrre. E l'asta è diventata immediatamente uno dei luoghi più profittevoli per le case d'aste. Hong Kong ormai sta quasi superando New York come fatturati, e quindi è diventato, purtroppo il reparto stampa mi dice sempre che non devo mai usare la parola moda, è sbagliatissimo. A me mi viene in mente ogni volta che parlo, perché purtroppo devo dire che spesso è diventato uno status symbol. Entrare nell'asta come artista, comprare in asta significa dimostrare di essere ormai completamente adeguato alle alte qualità, sia dal punto di vista economico che dal punto di vista di forma. Per cui è tutto più rapido nei paesi emergenti, ma oggi per noi la crisi si investe di più in Cina e in India che in Europa.
Grazie. Finalmente c'è ancora 10 minuti per la ultima domanda, l'opportunità d'oro. Astra, no?
Una domanda all'altro.
No. Okay, so grazie ancora. C'è un'altra talk con Nine Golden dopo questa. Thank you. Sì, alla 8, sì, auditorium, no? No, Centro Archivi. So today we have a really very, very active programs, events in the museum, and hopefully we can have that in the future every day. And also we can always come back. Yeah. But I don't think we would have every day such an opportunity to have someone like Amie Siegel sitting with Mariolina together to have such an incredible confrontation, synergy, and conversation. So, grazie ancora.